Hey, Salty Spectre, how are you doing? Hi, Luna. Oh, fun nickname. I like this one. It's cool. I hope you and your boyfriend are doing excellent tonight. you mean the map behind me? This one? It's a map of human history about. Well, it shows the history of societies and civilization that rose and fell within our known history. It's really fun to read, actually. You know it too. Wow. I had to pay it quite expensive. For me it was quite expensive. Had to get it from England, shipped, just they don't sell it here. I'm a pretty introverted kind of person, you know. Never managed to be like all jumpy. It's just not my natural state, I guess. I guess I could do the robot dance. Hello, Peaches. How are you doing, man? We'll be starting the stream in a few instants. Just warming you up. Hey, hey. Thank you, Salty. I'll put it a little bit lower. Let's see now. Well, just when it stops, I guess. Should be better now. But yeah, I should be practicing my voice. I'm not convinced I'm good here. So much better? Okay, thank you. Great. Or even a little bit more because... You're right, this is loud. There we go. That should be better. Thank you so much, Salty Spectre. Helps a lot to have actually somebody to let me know this kind of stuff.
I'm going to switch over to from my phone to my computer.
All right. Welcome, everybody. You are present for the first dry run of this stream and podcast. So, hey, Cordell, I can hear myself coming back through from your end. Was that like a monitoring feature that you put on for the music, or is that just coming through your microphone?
No, it's my headset, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Can it, Vaxon? Can you hear me twice?
Oh, I use touch to speak now.
Oh, I see. Never mind. That's because of the stream. You're fine. I don't think you need to use push to talk. Go ahead and turn push to talk off and see if it works. I didn't realize I had
Okay.
the stream in the background.
I don't know actually. Tark, try
Yeah,
talking?
Luna, that's fine. Typing?
No, just say something.
Oh, test.
Shit. Gonna turn off my phone too. Sorry.
All right. So, I'm going to be kicking off the my like introduction for the show. This is going to go about 2 hours, and we'll be editing 45 to 60 minutes out of this for a podcast, a philosophy and poetry podcast. Um, oh yeah, Poetry for Humanity is not a bad name, but what I was thinking the name would just be Not for Nothing. Do you want to change that to that at this time, or leave that as that? Uh,
Um, well, I put this at the moment. I figured so we at least have a title, you know.
yeah, exactly. So, um,
But we
let's
can
see.
definitely change it meanwhile or afterward, whichever suits everyone best.
I was thinking something like this with a title and a description as such. Um, Not that I'm firm on that, but that's what I was thinking for now. And
Okay.
Luna seemed to like it. See what you think about that. And
No,
then I don't mind Poetry for Humanity either. That's good too. Okay, so
um,
yeah, this is going to be weekly at this time for anybody, any audience members that are listening and actually engaged at this moment. Basically, once a week at this time for 2 hours, we're going to do a live stream with a lot of poetry reading, a fair amount of philosophical musings, and then just some, chit chat banter between me and Cordell. A minimum amount of music will be involved, but that's pretty much it. And you guys are very much, welcome to participate by suggesting poems or putting comments into the stream chat here. Ones that we find like useful or just notice or whatever, we'll read aloud and just hopefully the audience participation adds to the quality of the podcast ultimately. So this will be released through different podcast apps. Like if you had, I use Podcast Addict on my Android phone, and you could look it up and then find it. I think it's going to be a month or more until we start having edited material out in that fashion. And this is our first dry run. This is a dress rehearsal, so to speak. And yeah, this is the very first time we've ever done this. Cordell's been streaming for a while, but this idea of recording, editing, and releasing as a podcast is a new thing, and we're adding a distinct philosophical flavor to his content. In a few minutes, I'm just going to be kind of doing the first take, and we'll be starting her off. How are you doing, Cordell?
I'm doing excellent. That was a pretty good entrance. I loved it. Thank you. I liked the way you presented the show. And no, I'm doing excellent. I'm just getting ready to read some poems that I've selected. And yeah, pretty smooth.
great. Yeah, it's funny. Last night, Vexing Cat was asking me if I was excited about today, and I'm like, I was happy, but I was not excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to sleep. It's almost like a chore. I was like, I got to do stuff. I'm like, great. And then I woke up today, got coffee with me, and we're about to do this, and I was like, now I'm excited.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited right now. It's kind of cool. Okay.
I'm a little nervous, I gotta admit, though. Like, this is the first time
Cool.
I do one of those streams with many, you know,
Great.
yeah. But in a good
Great.
way, like butterflies in the valleys.
So I'm going to do a pre-introduction behind the scenes. Sort of this moment now would be edited out if this was to be a show. So I'll just go ahead and explain to anybody paying attention what's going on here. We have Luna behind the scenes who's doing moderation chat, and she's doing research and consultation for the content. A very trusted member of the team. Very glad she's here. Vexing Cat is here, both to help with certain behind the scenes stuff as far as content and research goes, but mostly she's going to be here as with her lovely voice to read poems and do occasional commentary. I'm Jonathan Block. I'm going to be the host of the show for what it's worth. Um, and then we have Cordell, our primary poet and our resident poet and primary reader, with his wonderful multicolored accent, which is just great to listen to poems read. And so we have, three quality voices for reading. And you guys, as the audience, go ahead and can request us to, read specific poems. You could be like, "Oh, I want Vexing to read this," or Cordell to read that, and that's fine. I mean, worst case scenario, we just don't notice or choose to look over it. But any sort of encouragement like that, like interaction from the audience, is not only allowed but encouraged. I'm glad you guys are here. I guess I haven't written anything down for this. I'm just going to be freestyling today. And then, just for a warning for anybody, as we go forward, because we're going to be editing and releasing this in podcast, whenever a poem gets read, if the reader stumbles on it, it's at their discretion to go ahead, put a pause, and read the poem again, so that it comes out, almost like a practice run and a real run. And then in the editing, we'll remove the practice run. And what that'll do is allow there to be a nice finished copy of it without us having to prepare all week with reading over and over again, and have it be more spontaneous and natural. And I think that's going to be nice. And I doubt that it's going to tilt out the live audience too much to hear poems occasionally twice. It'll probably, you're kind of here to witness some of the production with this. And I think that's going to be fun. In a few moments, I'll just go ahead and pretend we're starting off the show, and we'll just go with that.
Dude, I think I ruined your entrance. Sorry. I was gonna send something to Luna, and I had an echo of you for a while, for a couple of seconds.
That's okay. You're just fine.
Crap.
Okay, so let's.
Wait, I'm gonna make Luna a moderator. So I think Guta Manero, who's already one of my moderators, already there. But like that, we have two of them.
Oh yeah, Salty Spectre, exactly. I knew you were Luna. I just like that. And then
yeah. I'm gonna put this on the background so I have it here. Yes.
Oh no, it's okay, Luna. You're fine.
Let's see.
And then anybody who's here, if you think that you have friends that would be interested in philosophy and poetry content, feel free to hit them up and invite them to the stream. Word of mouth, kind of grassroots organic promotion can be like the best thing. So if you guys think you know somebody who would be into this content, feel free to send them a link to this Twitch stream.
Okay, we good to go.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody. This is the Not for Nothing podcast, Poetry and Philosophy for Living, brought to you by Cordell, Jonathan Block, and Vexing Cat. We're here today to read poetry, do analysis, and discuss the philosophy inherent within, and even sometimes just getting directly into philosophy and maybe lean back towards poetry. There's a huge poetry reading focus for this podcast. We're going to be doing a 2-hour stream each week that it will be edited into a 45-minute to an hour program. We don't have a interview done yet for this week, but the idea is that we will have that added to the final content, some music mixed in there. This is not to be an edited episode today. This is our first dry run. I'm so happy that you're all here. Our inaugural episode will be next week, and I look forward to seeing you all there. The focus for that episode, and subsequently this one for our dry run, we're just going to go ahead and go with it. It'll be 2 in a row this week. If you're going to be here for each individual live stream, then you might hear a lot of this content again. But right now, today, our topic is the Sufi poet Rumi. Being that this podcast is going to have a lot of philosophy and poetry content, we thought that for the first few weeks at least, to have the main topic of the show be a philosopher poet would be an excellent way to get started. I'd like to introduce the crew, staff, so to speak. I'm Jonathan Block, your host. We have live here with us our resident poet and primary poetry reader, Cordell.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be able to host you tonight, and I'm glad to be accompanied with my best host, which is Blocks, and Vexing, who's going to be reading poems with us. So this is excellent, and we're getting ready to do those readings.
Thank you, Cordell. We also have on hand the lovely Vexing Cat.
Hello.
Vexing will be doing occasional reading and occasional commentary as well. I believe she's going to be a little bit more to the background, but we'll see how this develops. This is our very, very first stream, episode 0, so to speak. We have Luna on hand in the background. She has been working throughout the week on developing content for this episode. She's our research department and going to be the chat moderator. If anybody here is around for a long period of time and proves themselves to be a trustworthy individual, we'll be adding different moderators to the stream chat as time goes on. I'm really happy for anyone that's here. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and dive right into the content. Today, we're covering the Sufi poet Rumi. As I've been working myself on educating myself in philosophy for a while with an interest in poetry, I've been asking people about philosopher poets and that stuff in general. And time again, people tell me that I need to get into Rumi. I had heard his name, didn't know much about him. About a month ago, 2 months ago, I started actually reading Rumi's poems and learning about his philosophies. And I have to say, I can see why he was recommended so many times. The man's absolutely amazing. I don't know if I agree with his philosophies per se. He's a little bit mercurial in some of his content, trying to describe the indescribable. So I can't say I agree or disagree with his philosophies because I cannot profess to understand them well enough to make such an assertion. That said, his poems make me think. They have beautiful wording. They were translated from another language and then still seem to be poetry. It's absolutely amazing. Maybe we should just dive right in with some readings. I'm not sure. Did you have any perspective or opinions on the poet Rumi, Cordell?
Well, I have a few poems at hand, but personally, I've been interested into him for a while. I like even the original versions of his poems. I find them extremely meditative, and I do know that the translation loses a lot, but it's like you said, that there is a deeper meaning in it that represent pretty well all poets, in the sense that we're not meant to be understood, we're meant to be understood by the viewers. We're not meant to be the center of attention. It's the reader that needs to interpret the poem. And in that sense, I totally agree with what you say. Rumi has a lot to give.
All right. And I'm used to using push to talk in general while I'm using these microphones. So if you guys notice that my keyboard or any other background noise is polluting it, please give me a heads up. One other note to the audience who's present right now. This is the dry run or episode 0, but there will be different things that get edited out even in subsequent weeks. So there might end up just being some kind of low content moments where we're kind of getting organized and finding poems and stuff. And again, if any of you have any suggestions for the content to be added to this, just feel free to hop right in there and participate. Um, Luna, did you have any specific poems that you thought that were the best to like read earlier in the day that showcase certain aspects of Rumi's philosophy? Let's see, I'll look in the Twitch chat here. Here, I'm gonna do some texting here. Oh, you're fine, Luna.
I have one
So,
that I can
yes.
read right away if you'd like. It's
Yeah,
called.
here's what we'll do. We'll get in there and read a couple of poems. I'll let Cordell read a few. And then I think while he's doing that, I'm just going to gather together a few specific philosophical concepts to touch on. And we can just go from poetry to philosophy and back to poetry sort of fluidly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cordell.
I'm gonna also pin a message on our chat. I think you might be able to find a few poems in there. Just in hand. So, the poem I'll be reading to you guys is called Like This. And yeah, it's from Rumi. If anyone asks you how the perfect satisfaction of all our sexual wanting would look, lift your face and say, like this. When someone mentions the gracefulness of the night sky, climb up on the roof and dance and say, like this. If anyone wants to know what spirit is or what God's fragrance means, lean your head towards him and or her, keep your face there close, like this. When someone quotes the old poetic image about clouds gradually uncovering the moon, slowly loosen knot by knot the strings of your robe, like this. If anyone wonders how Jesus raises the dead, don't try to explain the miracle. Kiss me on the lips, like this, like this. When someone asks what it means to die for love, point here. If someone asks how tall I am, frown and measure with your fingers the space between the creases on your forehead. This tall. The soul sometimes leaves the body, the returns. When someone doesn't believe that, walk back into my house. Like this. When lovers moan, they telling our story. Like this. I am a sky where spirits live. Stare into this deepening blue where the breeze says a secret. Like this. When someone asks what there is to do, light the candle in his hand. Like this. How did Joseph's scent come to Jacob? Ooh. How did Jacob's sight return? Ooh. A little wind cleans the eye, like this. When Shams comes back to Tabriz, he'll put just his head around the edge of the door to surprise us, like this. So this was from The Essential Rumi, translation by Coleman Barks with John Moyne.
Lovely. Well, unsurprisingly, it has that feeling of more than double entendre where the words said can be interpreted in more than one way and seem to be alluding to a reality that's difficult or impossible to understand and could sort of apply metaphorically to many things. I don't know if you guys get that too, but whenever I hear these sort of deeply philosophical and spiritual poems that seem to be directly getting at metaphysics, philosophical metaphysical realities, um, I like how it makes me, even if I missed the point he intentionally meant, I love how his poetry makes me think just effortlessly. I imagine all kinds of stuff.
On my side, it's weird. I think it's a sort of um, love letter about goodbye or something like that. That's what I had the feeling of, while I was reading it. Like somebody that passed and is saying to their lover, if somebody ever asks you about us, well, you can tell them it was like this, and stuff like that. But that's that's what I had the feeling of while I was reading it. Like, I don't know.
All right. Vexing. I don't know if you had any in, input about really any of this. If you wanted to mention something about Rumi or that poem, I know that we had one in the queue for you to read, but did you have any comments otherwise?
No, that was a lovely reading. Thank you, Cordell.
All right. Well, I think what I want to do, I don't know how conventional this really is, but I was thinking about reading a little bit off of the wiki from Rumi just to contextualize him somewhat for well myself, but the audience. Um, I don't know if that's a good source to read from, or if I should do further preparation. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm just start at the top here, and I'll read like two paragraphs here, and then we can move on to one more poem.
That's what I was gonna tell you. Don't hesitate to do it. It will help us all to have some background.
Yes. Okay.
Joey, did you see
Yes.
what Luna had sent us?
Mm. Oh, sure. This is some input from our behind the scenes content coordinator Luna. This says then in 1244 Rumi met a traveling Sufi called Shams, and the whole course of his life changed. Shams became fast friends with Rumi, in whom he recognized a kindred spirit. The two developed a very close friendship, and it was at this point that Rumi became more and more secluded, shunning the society of those he previously would discuss and debate matters with. His relationship with Shams caused great jealousy in his family and other students, and after a few years, Shams disappeared. Many believed he was murdered, but Rumi himself did not think so. He traveled for years looking for his friend, and it was this loss that led to the outpouring of his soul through his poetry.
Wow, that's actually beautiful.
It's really sad. All right. I'm going to read this first two paragraphs from the Wikipedia on Rumi. Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, also known as Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Balkhi, so I apologize for the terrible pronunciations. I'm not used to this one. And more popularly, simply as Rumi, was a 13th century Persian poet, faqih, Islamic scholar, theologian, and Sufi mystic, originally from Greater Khorasan. Rumi's influence transcends national borders and ethnic divisions. Iranians, Tajiks, Turks, Greeks, Pashtuns, and Central Asian Muslims, and the Muslims of South Asia have greatly appreciated his spiritual legacy for the past 7 centuries. His poems have been widely translated into many of the world's languages and transposed into various formats. Rumi has been described as the most popular poet and the best selling poet in the United States. Rumi's works are written mostly in Persian, but occasionally he also used Turkish, Arabic, and Greek in his verse. His Masnavi, composed in Konya, is considered one of the greatest poems of the Persian language. His works are widely read today in their original language across Greater Iran and the Persian speaking world. Translations of his works are very popular, most notably in Turkey, Azerbaijan, and the United States and South Asia. His poetry has influenced not only Persian literature, but also the literary traditions of Ottoman Turkish, Chagatai, Urdu, and Pashto languages. Um, yeah, I'll go ahead and get dip back into this wiki article here and there as we go through the day, just to put some more stuff on that. So I think we have one in the queue here. Vexing Cat, are you here? She may have gone AFK, so to speak, for a
I'm
moment.
here.
Okay. Did you want to read a poem?
Certainly. I received one from Luna, our background lady in charge. A new rule. Okay. Let me just read this, and I'm going to turn down the volume for a second. There we go.
Oh, what you might want to do is actually turn the sound off on the stream and then just
A
listen
New
through
Rule
the.
by Rumi. Okay, I can do that. It is the rule with drunkards to fall upon each other, to quarrel, become violent, and make a scene. The lover is even worse than a drunkard. I will tell you what love is: to enter a mine of gold. And what is that gold? The lover is a king above all kings, unafraid of death, not at all interested in a golden crown. The dervish has a pearl concealed under his patched cloak. The dervish has a pearl concealed under his patched cloak. Why should he go begging door to door? Last night, that moon came along, drunk, dropping clothes in the street. Get up, I told my heart. Give the soul a glass of wine. The moment has come to join the nightingale in the garden, to taste sugar with the soul parrot. I have fallen, with my heart shattered, where else but on your path, and I broke your bowl, drunk my idol, so drunk, don't let me be harmed, don't let me be harmed, take my hand. A new rule, a new law has been born. Break all the glasses and fall toward the glass blower.
All right. Oh, uh, any thoughts from either of you guys on this poem?
I'd like to hear the thoughts of Vexing that read it first, if you don't mind.
I like the line that says, "The lover is even worse than a drunkard."
I don't
It
know.
reminds me of
It was kind of an interesting imagery. Shatter the glasses. Let it be the new rule.
I'm
I
not
like that.
certain, but I feel as though the lag between me and Vexing is unusually high compared to what I'm used to. Just getting to a technical thing real quick here.
Yeah, it's what I was
Cordell,
gonna say,
which
actually.
server are you using for this call in the upper right where it says region?
Okay, so one of the things I've noticed, I'm using US West for the
Yeah,
region, but one
so
of the things I've noticed is that the volume of your mic is higher than the volume of Vex. I had to compensate on OBS actually.
Okay.
manually.
Do you think I should adjust that at this point or leave it as is?
Like one of you two should, I don't know. Like yeah, we should balance this thing so I don't have to
Yeah,
go up
give me
and
a quick
down.
second. I'll change my outbound.
Because essentially I can put everything a little bit louder or everything a little bit lower, but I can't do one or the other.
Well, in Discord, you could just right click on me and adjust the sound there. But let me do this. Hold on. How's this? I do, but anyway, how just for your ears, how's this volume now? Hello, hello, testing. 1, 2, 3,
Is this
testing.
supposed to be a video?
This is in the Discord thing. He's just streaming.
Can you talk a little bit, Vexing?
I don't know why hers is so far behind. What
Oh, I know.
server are you
She's watching. She's watching the stream. Are you watching the
Oh
stream?
yeah, no, mute the stream and listen through Discord. Mute Twitch. You don't want to listen there.
Yeah, that's probably it because the Twitch is always gonna be a few seconds lagging.
Are you muted, Vex?
Oh, I see her.
Literally, I hear nothing with the stream muted. Like you guys aren't coming through Discord.
Oh
I
shit. Wait, I'm gonna see something. Did I modify volume, Vex?
No, that's
Wait,
she just can't hear us on Discord. It's
gonna put you
fine.
at 200%, Vex.
Can you hear us now? No, she doesn't have to be at 200%. She has to be able to hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, that's why there was that epic lag because we were waiting for the Twitch lag to go through.
That's okay. It's the first stream. It's what we meant to do. Learn how to do this.
I thought it was
Absolutely.
really strange. I couldn't hear you guys, and why there was such a long delay.
Yeah, well, the delay was through the Twitch stream, and you couldn't hear us because of your funniness with Discord. I don't know what that is, but we'll deal with that also.
I
Been putting
still
up with it at
find
this point.
the volume of Vex extremely low. Try talking again.
Hold on. 1 second. Let me adjust some things. How about now, Cordell?
Well, now you got now you have
Okay.
some background noise. What'd you just change?
The decibels was at 60, and I noticed it wasn't picking up everything I was saying.
Yeah, but what did you change it to then from
The
60?
decibels, I went from
Okay.
60 to 70.
There you
Okay.
go. Yeah, but now I think you are
Is
both
that-
balanced. Try again.
How about now?
Yeah,
We
that's
good?
perfect on your side, Vexing. How
Okay,
about
I'm at
And how's-
80% output.
How's my
and
volume
then-
doing?
perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely.
Wonderful.
Hey Luna, as between the three of our voices, since you're a third party, how's the volume doing? Between all three of it on the stream. She might be AFK. Okay, so oh, sounds great. Perfect.
Wonderful.
All right.
Yay, thank you, Luna.
Okay, here I'll turn up mine from I had it down a bit, but yeah. Good. Okay, so if you want to just get back to where we were at, Vexing, you had some analysis of the poem that got sort of interrupted. Did you want to get back to that?
Yeah. Now that I think everything's in time, it makes more sense. Yes, like stanza by stanza, he creates this beautiful imagery. And I just really enjoyed the way it was written. And just like it is the rule with drunkards to fall upon each other, to quarrel, to become violent and make a scene. Like that sets it up. Like you're expecting violence and hatred and physical manifestations of strength. The lover is even worse than a drunkard. That one line just sets the tone of everything else. Like the lover is so much worse because there's passion and heat with fire behind it, whereas like a brawl in a brothel or a pub somewhere is just full of hate in the moment, and then once you know beat each other bloody, you know, you pat each other on the backs and you're done. Whereas with a lover there's like resentment and hatred and sadness and all of these other emotions that last longer than that single battle. And so and it says to tell you what love is to enter a mine of gold, meaning that you're literally surrounded by all of these good things. And if you can pick out those nuggets, you know, you can take that passion back with you, that joy, and hold it close to your heart. And then it goes on. I mean, from there, just the imagery is fantastic. Oh,
Beautiful
Peaches.
analysis.
Yeah.
But
So one of the audience here, Peaches and Cream, was mentioning about a Sufi is to be a student, a dervish is a principle, the pearl wisdom, to break the transparent vessels which hold our beliefs. Yeah, transparent vessels. Yeah, dervish. He's talking about doorways and stuff. I find that I'll have to find one of my favorite poems I read of his before and read it. But I noticed that he's always talking about how there's some world beyond this, but that it's like here at the same time or something like that. Talking about the he's a mystic. He's a mystic poet, so he's talking about mysticism in this way that I find to be less not offensive, less less esoteric. Like it is not understandable, but he's talking about it in a way as though he's trying to make it accessible rather than trying to hang something over you and be like, ha ha, I have access to something that you don't. I feel as though there's this sort of openness and welcoming quality to his e- attempt to describe the esoteric or indescribable. And I find that to be a very pleasing aspect of his poetry.
I totally agree with you, like in many ways. But I have to say, you know, the esoteric aspect he has, it reminds me of like okay, uh, it reminds me of an approach to science, but into a mystical way of expressing it. Like sometimes I feel like the guy is actually talking about quantum physics, multiverse, space, and dimensions. Like literally.
If either of you guys want to read from this, I just put a link in our little behind the scenes chat of a site that has it's formatted in such a way as they're easy to read, and I like some of the poems on here. I'm trying to find the one that pretty much blew my mind. Oh, here we go. This one's called Only Breath. See what you guys think about that one. I find this one to be a great example of just trying to describe something that's actually not possible to understand as a human being or something like that. This is Only Breath from the Essential Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks or whatever. Put that, but I don't know what he did with it, but his works to put it together. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the east or the west, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist, am not an entity in this world or in the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know. First, last, outer, inner. Only that breath, breathing, human being. So in this piece, the way he's distanced himself from so many things, kind of like if you think of conceptual diametric opposites, by distancing himself from so many things, it's like he puts himself sort of like in I don't know, like when I was studying higher dimensions and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. It's like he's putting himself away from one thing after another until he's sort of away from everything and then makes a statement which gives it a different kind of flavor. And while simultaneously doing that, I'm absolutely fascinated that this poetry written in another language has these lines like my place is placeless, a trace of the traceless. And it just has this poetic not rhyming in a sonnet, but still there's wonderful wordplay in English, which I don't know if it has to do with a translation or just coincidence or what. And that the last less only that breath breathing human being. It sounds so poetic, and I find that just lovely.
I think I can explain that duality part that you're talking about, because if you think of it in a sense, in all languages, opposites tend to either rhyme or sound beautiful, like together. Like if I said cold and warm, it almost sounds like they should go together. Or like if I say, okay, for a stereotype, black and white, it sounds like those two words go together, or fire and water, still the same. So I think that's an aspect that goes in every language, and that's why, it sounds beautiful, because he used a technique that's not only poetic in its own way, but it's also poetic into a universal way, in the sense that it touches uh, something that's almost intuitive in a linguistic way, like the way we create our languages.
Right. Um, so really from anybody in the chat or behind the scenes or present here, does anybody here have any pers- perspective or comment on what they think about the philosophies of Rumi? He's called a philosopher poet, and we've talked a bit about his mysticism and circumstance, and we've read some of his poems. But I'm interested in trying to tease out any specific philosophical perspective, if possible, during the course of this. We're somewhere near the halfway mark of this live stream. I want to spend a moment just to thank every single person for being here. Remind you guys this is episode 0 of an upcoming podcast series. So thanks for being here. Anyway, did anybody have any comment or perspective on the philosophies presented so far in the poems, or what you know about Rumi at large?
I have something that I'd like to mention. Wasn't he an astronomer too? I have this feeling that I read somewhere that he was an astronomer. Can somebody confirm this?
You said that he was like an ancient astronomer.
Yeah, I believe I've read something about that, but like,
Let me take a look.
yeah, he was an astronomer, a mathematician and an astronomer. And that's how I actually knew him. Before I knew him for his poetry, I remember reading a book about astronomy and them mentioning him.
Cool.
He's actually one of, if I remember well what I read, he's actually one of the guys that suspected that the galaxy was much, much bigger than what we thought. Like, well, the space. Like, if I remember well, he assumed that the star were actually star systems, like a sun and planets around it. And I'm pretty sure he was one of the first official people to do it.
What year? Okay, so he was born in 1207, 1207 AD. Is that correct?
Oh, I have another year here. Am I looking at the same guy? On Wikipedia, I'm reading 1364 to 1436.
Give me a second here.
Am I reading the wrong person?
Here, no, September 30th, 1207. Died December 17th, 1273.
Oh,
He's a
okay.
13th century Persian.
So there might be two Rumis then. Yeah, wait, I'll send you a link of what I was
Ah,
looking at. So,
well, that's cool.
no,
Yeah, I think you're literally taking a look at another guy.
yeah,
Yes, this is a different individual.
okay, yeah. Oh, damn. Okay, well, I guess I know more about, yeah, the.
Oh, it's all good. I mean, Rumi, it's a totally reasonable misidentification. We're good. Okay, so at this time, oh, I wanted to just make a comment from something Peaches and Cream put into the chat here. She written the line, the only experience of being. And I think that the, just to get into a philosophical tip, it seems as though a lot, at least philosophically, if not just generally conceptually, a lot of his work entailed the nature of experience and the nature of being, and not just facts, not just uh demonstrable reality, like with f- logic and facts and science and stuff like that, but more about the internal. And a word like qualia comes to mind, where it seems as though the actual nature of being and how our experience interacts with that seems to be a core conceptual component of his work. And I think there might be some comparisons to other philosophers who got into being quite a bit. I think Heidegger is one that talked about being a whole lot.
Sounds good.
I'm going to do a quick moment to look up philosophers and being in existence, see if I can find any corollaries outside of poetry into the philosophical realm. Give me a second here.
Vexing, would you like to read a poem or should I fill the blank?
It looks like Luna's got something on standby for me. Here, just a second.
Sounds great.
Wonderful. Let's get this time take a quick break. We can go ahead and take 5 to grab a glass of water and a cigarette, whatever it is. I don't know if it's easy enough for you to
Mhm.
cue that song back up. Do you want to play that one time, Cordell?
Well, I figured I'd let Vex read a poem and then,
I
yeah, we
think
can
she's
take.
getting prepped on that one. It might be a
Okay.
minute.
Yeah, for sure. No worries.
And after that, after we come back from the break, we'll read a couple of poems, and then I'm going to get into a philosophical tip on, I think, existence and being for a moment, and then I'll probably do a little more reading on Rumi himself. And while we're on break, if you like, Cordell, perhaps look up a couple of poems from Rumi that you'd like to read, or even other poets. Make sure you get some good reading time in during the next hour. Okay, we're taking a quick break, guys. For the audience too, if you guys want to go grab a glass of water or whatever, we'll be right back.
Sounds good. 555.
Yeah, I'm ready if you are. Just count me in.
Okay, guys. Here's Vex, who's gonna read us a poem that she got.
So, this poem by Rumi is called The Progress of Man. It's a little bit longer, but not too long. The Progress of Man by Rumi. First he appeared in the realm inanimate, thence came into the world of plants and lived the plant life many a year, nor called to mind what he had been, then took the onward way to animal existence, and once more remembers not of what life vegetative. Same when he feels himself moved with desire towards it in the season of sweet flowers, as babes that seek the breast and know not why. Again, the wise Creator whom thou knowest uplifted him from animality to man's estate, and so from realm to realm, advancing, he became intelligent, cunning, and keen of wit as he is now. No memory of his past abides with him, and from his present soul he shall be changes. Though he fell asleep, God will not leave him. In this forgetfulness, awakened, he will laugh to think what troublous, will laugh to think what troublous dreams he had, and wonder how his happy state of being he could forget and not perceive that all those pains and sorrows were the effect of sleep and guile and vain illusion. So this world seems lasting, though 'tis but the sleeper's dream, who, when the appointed day shall dawn, escapes from dark imaginings that haunt him, and turns with laughter on his phantom griefs, when he beholds his everlasting home. So my takeaway from this one is it is literally the evolution of man from a plant to, the, primordial creature that forgot his plant-like life and perceived, not but then as his soul begins to evolve, as he begins to change, and God will not leave him in this forgetfulness. He becomes awakened, inspired, growing into the humanity that we know and exist as now, and then to have his unhappy state to be unhappy, and forget the pains and sorrows of his life. It's basically talking about heaven and his everlasting home, the existence beyond this physical life is my takeaway.
I feel as though that sort of touches in directly to something that I see in Western philosophy in different ways, but that's directly acknowledged by Buddhist philosophy, where they just state, life is suffering or existence is suffering, and that he's whether or not he subscribes to that particular moniker, basically, whether or not he's saying that, it seems as though he's addressing the suffering, the inherent difficulty of being alive and how we want to be happy, and we become aware of that through being unhappy, and that there's a certain uh, like this a paradoxical relationship of our desires and our existence, and that part of what leads him to like the next world or the higher world is these, I don't know if truth's the right word, but these impending realities that we want to be happy and then suffer, and how to deal with that. Also, someone like Nietzsche talking about being happy, and how he's like, how I can't remember the direct quote, but he's talking about how loathsome it is for people to be happy and comfortable, and basically that you need to fight for what you think is important and beautiful in this world, and then it's not just going to be like comfortable and easy. And it seems like there's some sort of through line there in what you're mentioning in this poem, and lots and lots of philosophy that I've seen.
On my side, personally, it reminded me a lot about evolution theory. I know it sounds weird, but the whole concept of rising from the mud and like, yeah, that whole becoming a plant and rising all the time. I mean, to me, it felt very much like a metaphor for evolution. But now that I've heard your inputs, like I understand the spiritual aspect of that metaphor, and it makes more sense than my understanding of a sort of description of the evolution theory within the parameters of a language, like 600 years old and with different belief systems and stuff like that. But
That's the thing about Rumi, Cordell. He was rather deep. It could very easily mean both.
Rather deep.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty sure back in those days there was a lot of science, well, interest for science, at least. People were curious on some level, at least in the Middle East, because, well, Europe was in straight up in the Dark Ages back then.
I went ahead and did a quick uh, work check, fact check, but I made sure that I wasn't talking out my rear on Martin Heidegger, the philosopher from 1949. He talked a lot about existence and being. I found this whole article on it that I might read something from, but what I wanted to do is basically read a little bit out of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about existence, because even though this might not relate directly to the concepts of Rumi and how he saw it, I think that this is going to relate at least indirectly to his stuff. Oh, Luna, lovely. Yes, I will actually read a little bit from the SCP on phenomenology as well, because for anyone who doesn't know that term phenomenology, forgive me if this isn't a really accurate description, but basically phenomenology talks about how our perception can influence the reality that we're in. So instead of just being like totally like solipsistic delusional crap where it's like, oh, this is my world and I make it up, it's more like you exist in the real world but influence it. And from a scientific end, you might hear a term like observer universe, where it's impossible in experimentation to separate the observer from the universe, and at some point the observer becomes responsibility for collapsing wavelengths and actually producing a reality from superposition. And these concepts start to produce concepts where, since it's a relationship between observer and observed, not a there's a back and forth there. A word like phenomenology could describe these potential interdependent interactions of existence. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read. I don't know how much I'm going to read, just a few minutes. I don't want to get way into the weeds, but I want to offer the audience some perspective on existence from a really nerdy philosophical perspective. I think it could be enriching for this topic of Rumi. This is from the article on existence in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, first published Wednesday, October 10th, 2012. Existence raises deep and important problems in metaphysics, philosophy of language, and philosophical logic. Many of the issues can be organized around the following two principles. Is existence a property of individuals? And, assuming that existence is a property of individuals, are there individuals that lack it? What does it mean to ask if existence is a property? A full answer to this question requires a general theory of properties, which is well beyond the scope of this article. I briefly sketch the landscape to set up our discussion of existence. Properties contrast with individuals. This distinction can be explained using the instantiation relation. My cat instantiates the property of being hungry, as that is a way he is, and being an individual is not himself instantiated by anything. While properties also instantiate, the property of being red, for example, has the property of being a color. Only properties are instantiated. Individuals only instantiate. So, our first question is whether existence is instantiated, and if so, whether it is instantiated by individuals like Obama, my chair, and the fig tree in my backyard. Do individuals, in addition to ordinary properties like human being comfortable to sit in, and needing more water, instantiate a property expressed by the English verb exists? I feel like th- I feel like I'm falling down some well where every question ends up like dealing with causality. It's like the word instantiate and instantiated is almost like saying what causes what. Is this causing that, or is that causing this? Sort of like I was doubting whether or not causality exists because I like to troll about that stuff. And this woman from uh, East Asian, I guess East India. I don't know the proper term. I think she's an Indian woman, but she's of a physicist, studying that kind of stuff, and I was saying that I wasn't sure we understand how causality exists in a similar way to certain Eastern religions, or like David Hume talked about that stuff. And I was kind of being playful, but she was talking about how experimentation starts to show that we can't tell when you observe something and collapse a wavelength whether you caused that to happen, or like basically the relationship of photons interacting with other things. It's hard to say which thing caused which as they interact. It's basically like this cause effect relationship that's both. And I felt like as I read that, the instant uh the instantiate and the instantiated, it's like trying to ask which one causes which. I don't know how far off I am on that. Maybe Luna could get in with a comment on that. By the way, for any of our audience members, our behind the scenes coordinator here who's helping with research, Luna, she's actually gotten a degree in philosophy and understands. She's actually educated instead of just a blowhard like myself. Um, I'm going to read one more paragraph from this. There is a debate in the literature on properties between the abundant conception of properties, according to which there is a property corresponding to every natural language predicate, and, more generally, every class of individuals, and the sparse conception of properties, according to which a predicate exists a property only if the object that predicate is true of resemble one another in an intrinsic way. If the abundant conception is true, then our first question may seem trivial. Existence is a property of individuals because sentences like Bill Gates exists are grammatical, and there is a class of all individuals and hence a corresponding property of existing. It seems, then, that our first question has bite only if the sparse conception is true. But appearances deceive. As we will see in section 1, there is a controversy as to whether the logical form of a sentence like Bill Gates exists is really subject predicate in structure, and so whether the English verb exists really is predicated of individuals. The question whether existence is a property of individuals is perhaps more straightforward on the sparse conception of properties. But the question can still be raised even on the abundant conception, as the question whether existence is a property of individuals involved in our talk of what exists and what does not, which is then a question about the logical form of sentences used in our existential discourse.
I'd like to give some input to everything you said, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think I'm really enjoying this article and wouldn't mind reading more in abstract, but I'd say for this presentation, we're getting way into the weeds, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Any comments you have on it are encouraged.
Well, there is two aspects that I want to say. Like, you were talking about something called phenomenology before, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. So it's not something I'm really familiar as the way you described it, but I'm familiar
Well,
with
that
it.
was from the article on existence,
Yeah.
but phenomenology is another thing that
But
I think we're going to get into
well,
in
the
just a second.
description of it, I'm familiar, and what I would say is I've seen some physical example of it, like people who lose limbs and then they have like replacements or stuff, like to allow the brain to actually interpret sense that they don't have anymore. That's something that already exists. Like, if I'm not wrong, I believe they made a jacket for blind people that works with pressure and warmth and cold, like sensations, and people can actually tell at what distance and what's in front of them just by like kind of walking around, or something
Yeah,
like that, you know.
translating visual data to tactile perception.
Exactly, and actually the brains adapt quite quickly. Like if you wear the
Hmm.
tent first time, you probably won't feel anything. Plus, if you still have the sense, the natural sense of sight or hearing, usually it doesn't help much. But if you don't have it, all you focus is basically on it, and people learn how to use it quite quickly. And it's with a lot of things like that. So I would argue that our brain is actually literally connected to whatever way we have to experience sensing, you know, like
Hmm.
well, yeah, sensing is the only word I can come up with. And on the other hand, like you were talking about the reality of things, like how people affect us. Like I think you mentioned Obama or something like that in the beginning, and in some way, I think it's you're right mentioning that because the truth is, it's not like on a deep level. This world is not really at war with nations, religions, and all of that. It's really at war with basic instincts. Are we gonna be a species that's gentle, good, helpful, humane, or are we gonna be a species that's destructive, lustful, jealous, destructive, like ready to do anything to get what we need? And in that sense, we are still defining ourselves. Like humanity is literally still defining ourselves. And we do it under the pretense, of nations and religion and even philosophy or stuff like that. But the truth is, it goes beyond that because, like how you can meet good people in every doctrines, like in every society. There is not a single society in which there is actually no, you know, gentle, good people that will be helpful. So, in a deep aspect, considering that it's all a melting pot, be it doctrines, religion, or whatever, or even politics, like everything is connected, we are indeed, you know, trying to define ourselves. I'll give you the mic.
Right. Um, so, what I think I want to read a little bit from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Phenomenology at this time, but first, because I think some people are here more for poetry than anything, and I don't want to burn out the audience. I was wondering if you or Vexing had a poem you'd like to read from really any poet, uh, hopefully one relevant to the topic at hand, but it doesn't really matter. Maybe even some more roomy. Do either of you guys have something that you'd like to read?
Well, personally, I'd like to read one of my poems before we finish the stream, but
I
I
was
can
just
do it.
thinking I wanted to do an original too.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay, perfect. And then I think Luna is actually queuing up a couple poems on the subject. She's so well versed in philosophy and interested in all this. I think her guidance is going to be helpful here. We'll get Vexing to read a couple. I'll read a couple. You'll read a couple. We'll get some actual poetry content here instead of just all this philosophy garbage. I love it. All right. Please, if you had an original you wanted to read, Cordell, being our resident poet, uh, I'd love to hear it, man.
Okay, I will be reading to you guys a poem that I call I Dance. Let's see. There we go. At night, I dance with the shadows. The song in my mind humming low follows my steps in afterglows. In the eye of the tornado, I'm swirling high above the ground. All is blurred into vertigo. I forget everything I know. While listening to silent sounds, I forget everything I know. I remember days long ago when we danced beneath that willow and we kissed under mistletoe. I lost my heart in that meadow. I dance alone with my shadow. The lights dim and there's no sound. My despair does not let me go. As I dance, I remain shallow. My distress reigns on my gallows, as all is buried by sorrow. Oh, if only I could let go, forget each one of my wounds, but I lost by curse a spellbound my shadow and self long ago. Light surrounds me, the fire grows and burns and twirls in tempo. My ghost left a burial ground. Now they free and we waltz around. We spin as ourself we confound, and soon I forget all I've known. The darkness is cold to the skin. In my mind, to the void akin, my inner walls are closing in. Soon my shadow is breaking in. My phantom guides me by the hand, from here to past long forgotten. I'm with her, dancing on the sand, beneath golden clouds of cottons. Then I dance with my shadow, till we are both one with the dark, as this present that just a spark. I vanish within the void's flow. So that was it for me.
Shall I read the next one, Blocks? I'll take that as a yes.
I believe you should, yes.
Yeah. Because I Cannot Sleep by Rumi. Because I cannot sleep, I make music at night. I am troubled by the one whose face has the color of spring flowers. I have neither sleep nor patience, neither a god reputation nor disgrace. 1,000 robes of wisdom are gone. All my good manners have moved 1,000 miles away. The heart and the mind are left angry with each other. The stars and the moon are envious of each other. Because of this alienation, the physical universe is getting tighter and tighter. The moon says, "How long will I remain suspended without a sun, without love's jewel inside of me? Let the bazaar of my existence buy destroyed stone by stone. O love, you who have been called by 1,000 names, you who know how to pour the wine into the chalice of the body, you who give culture to 1,000 cultures, you who are faceless but have 1,000 faces. O love, you who shape the faces of Turks, Europeans, and Zanzibaris, give me a glass from your bottle, or a handful of bang from your branch. Remove the cork once more, then we'll see 1,000 chiefs prostrate themselves, and a circle of ecstatic troubadours will play. Then the addict will be breed. Then the addict will be breed of craving and will be resurrected, and stand in awe till judgment day. So I feel like Rumi wrote this because he was troubled by his own existential existence. He has no patience. He cannot sleep. He doesn't understand. And it's eating away at him, leaving him angry and upset with the physical universe that he feels alienated from. Without love's jewel inside of me, without hope, without joy, without a future, his existence is destroyed stone by stone, quite literally. Oh, love who has been called by 1,000 names. I'm pretty sure he's beseeching God in this context. He's asking, oh God, who knows how to pour wine into the chalice of the body, eating of the body of Christ and drinking of his blood. you who give culture to 1,000 cultures, you who are faceless but have 1,000 faces. God appears to everyone differently. And that's, he shapes the faces of everyone. And in that whole belief that everybody's the same because they're all shaped by God and that everything has meaning. So he's asking God, remove your cork once more, and we'll see 1,000 chiefs prostrate themselves. If you open up and show the world that you exist, you will have an ecstatic circle of troubadours play. You will show the world that you exist. And then the addict who craves what God has will be resurrected and stand in joy until judgment day. So that is my interpretation on this one. I see a lot of God in Rumi's poetry.
I was gonna tell you that was a beautiful reading, and it's so interesting how we hear different things in poems. I love it. I heard indeed the references to the divine in the poem, but to me there were a few lines that I found extremely touching. Um, and I don't know, like at one point, I think you spoke about the moon not knowing where to go if the sun wasn't somewhere around or something like that. And I was literally thinking about, well, how scientifically accurate it was to say that back in those days. uh, so, yeah, uh,
Yeah.
I think
All right.
it's very interesting.
What was your take, Blocks? What did you think of that poem?
I I have similar feelings about all of Rumi's work where I feel like he's saying something and getting at something else every single time because he's not so secretly trying to talk about things that aren't so much secret but indescribable, meaning that it's like he's always like trying to like point at the veil, like you point at something and he's pointing through it, and it's like he's always trying to like get at that with his lines, and I just love that about his work. All right, so we have one curated here from Luna. I'm going to go ahead and read it this time. This is Reality and Appearance. Like I just said, just the title. It's like he's already like pointing through the veil. It's great. Anyway, 'tis light makes color visible at night. Red, green, and russet vanish from thy sight. So to thee light by darkness is made known. Since God hath none, he, seeing all, denies himself eternally to mortal eyes. From the dark jungle as a tiger bright, from the viewless spirit leaps to light. Is that Rumi? How did that turn into like a sonnet in English? Is that just Luna? Is that one by Rumi or like about the similar subject matter?
I'm pretty sure depending on the translator, you have different priorities. Some will
Yeah.
prioritize the meaning, others will prioritize the lyrical techniques behind it.
Yeah. That reminds me. Yeah, that's amazing how it comes out in sonnet form. It reminds me of a poem. There's three poems I found written by Plato, and when I read them all, I was just shocked that they functioned as actual um, you know, poetry. Let me see. I want to find the one "Neath This Tall Pine." Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read this. This is a poem by Plato, and the reason I'm reading this one, I mean, I'd say that Plato definitely gets into like metaphysics and existence and being and some certain mystical stuff with his realm of the forms, even though he wasn't necessarily trying to explain it in such a religious and mystical way as Rumi may have been. I'd say there's a little overlap conceptually here, but really more about uh, the nature of poem translations and some of the just I find it fascinating how well this works. This is a poem by Plato called "Neath This Tall Pine." Neath this tall pine, that to the zephyr sways and murmurs low, mayest thou recline, while near thee cooling waters flow. This flute of mine shall pipe the softest song it knows to sing, and to thy charmed eyelids sleep will bring. I mean, that's from 2,400 years ago, written in ancient Greek, and it comes out in like sonnet form in English. And I find that jaw dropping. All right. Cordell, do you have another poem that you'd like to read? Perhaps an original, or maybe another another poet, some more Rumi,
I have one from Rumi here that I like to give it a shot.
please. And then while you're doing that, if Bexing, if you'd like to prepare one, we'll have you go next. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and read a few paragraphs out of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Phenomenology.
Sounds good. So, the moving water. When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. When action comes from another section, the feeling disappears. Don't let others lead you. They may be blind or worse, vultures. Reach for the robe of God. And what is that? Putting aside self-will because of willfulness. People sit in jail, the trapped bird's wings are tied, fish sizzle in the skillet. The anger of police is willfulness. You've seen a magistrate inflict visible punishment. Now see the invisible. If you could leave your selfishness, you would see how you've been torturing your soul. We are born and live inside black water in a well. How could we know what an open field of sunlight is? Don't insist on going where you think you want to go. Ask the way to the spring. Your living pieces will form a harmony. There is a moving palace that floats in the air with balconies and clear water flowing through infinity everywhere, yet contained under a single tent. So that was it, and my take on this it's that it's pretty much a plea to for people to survive whatever they have to do, and I like it because sometimes the feeling of sacrificing oneself, well, I don't know about everybody else, but I personally have a feeling of self-sacrifice that can be, sometimes a little bit too forward. And
Mm-hmm.
it's true that I guess we can forget about ourselves in the desire to save or help everybody else. And in some
Mm-hmm.
way, that's actually achieving harmony because it's a balance of, helping others, helping yourself, being able to keep on helping others and at the same time surviving through whatever is coming towards you.
It reminds me of an idiomatic expression that just says, "The best thing you can do to help yourself is help those around you." And the best thing you can do to help those around you is help yourself.
Yeah, it's pretty much what I was thinking about while I was reading this.
Okay, so just to break up this really in the weeds philosophy content, um, in the behind the scenes chat, Luna had mentioned there's a difference between phenomenology and ontology, and it just got me going on it. So I read a little bit about existence. Now I'm going to read 2 paragraphs about ontology. We'll have some more poems, and then I'm going to read a couple paragraphs about phenomenology. I think this stuff is all related to, you know, any sort of philosophy, but particularly a philosopher poet like Rumi. So, I don't know if this ties in directly with any poem at any point, like here, this goes here, but I think this is nice philosophical context for this whole subject. Okay. This is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There's an article here on logic and ontology, but I'm just going down to bullet point 3 on ontology because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with logic, but that's not what I'm trying to get into right now. But the philosophical nature of existence and being. So we're talking about ontology. 3.1 Different concepts of ontology. As a first approximation, ontology is the study of what there is. Some contest this formulation of what ontology is, so it's only a first approximation. Many classical philosophical problems are problems in ontology. The question whether or not there is a God, or the problem of the existence of universals, etc. These are all problems in ontology in the sense that they deal with whether or not a certain thing, or more broadly, entity, exists. But ontology is usually also taken to encompass problems about the most general features and relations of the entities which do exist. There are also a number of classical philosophical problems that are problems in ontology understood this way. For example, the problem of how a universal relates to a particular that has it, assuming there are universals and particulars. Or the problem of how an event like John eating a cookie relates to the particulars John and the cookie, and the relation of eating, assuming there are events, particulars, and relations. These kinds of problems quickly turn into metaphysics more generally, which is the philosophical discipline that encompasses ontology as one of its parts. The borders here are a little fuzzy, but we have at least 2 parts to the overall philosophical project of ontology on our preliminary understanding of it. First, say what there is, what exists, what the stuff is reality, reality is made out of. Secondly, say what the most general features and relations of these things are. This way of looking at ontology comes with 2 sets of problems, which leads to the philosophical discipline of ontology being more complex than just answering the above questions. The first set of problems is that it isn't clear how to approach answering these questions. This leads to the debate about ontological commitment. The second set of problems is that it isn't clear what these questions really are. This leads to the philosophical debate about meta-ontology. Man, I love how reading out of the SEP just puts you in the weeds so hard. Like you just go look up something like desire and it's like you just take it for granted and then you start, I mean, ontology obviously is going to get into the weeds, but the simplest of words become hard to understand when you really think about it. And I find that just fascinating in itself that words we use flippantly and feel like we understand it, the closer you look at it, it's like trying to look into pixels and you're like, wait, it's not a dog, it's a bunch of pixels. Like you look at each pixel and you're like, wait, it's a piece of technology. Wait, what is that? And like the closer you look, it's like sometimes the less you understand. I find that to be fascinating about philosophy.
I
I
agree.
believe
To rip the
I believe our
veil of reality through poetry is the way to go.
yeah. I believe our lovely Vexing Cat is ready to read a poem.
I sure am, Box, thank you. Every Craftsman by Rumi. I've said it before that every craftsman searches for what not there to practice his art. I've said before that every craftsman searches for what's not there to practice his craft. A builder looks for the rotten hole where the roof caved in. A water carrier picks the empty pot. A carpenter stops at the house with no door. Workers rush towards some hint of emptiness, which they then start to fill. Their hope, though, is for emptiness, so don't think you must avoid it. It contains what you need. Dear soul, if you were not friends with the vast nothing inside, why would you always be casting your net into it and waiting so patiently? This invisible ocean has given you such abundance, but still you call it death, that which provides you sustenance and work. God has allowed some magical reversal to occur so that you see the scorpion pit as an object of desire and all the beautiful expanse around it as dangerous and swarming with snakes. This is how strange your fear of death and emptiness is, and how perverse the attachment to what you want. Now that you've heard me on your misapprehensions, dear friend, listen to Attar's story on the same subject. He strung the pearls of this about King Mahmud, how among the spoils of his Indian campaign there was a Hindu boy whom he adopted as a son. He educated and provided royally for the boy and later made him vice regent, seated on a gold throne beside himself. One day he found the young man weeping. Why are you crying? You're the companion of the emperor. The entire nation is ranged out before you like stars that you can command. The young man replied, I am remembering my mother and father and how they scared me as a child with threats of you. Uh-oh, he's headed for King Mahmud's court. Nothing could be more hellish. Where are they now when they should see me sitting here? This incident is about your fear of changing. You are the Hindu boy. Mahmud, which means praise to the end, is the spirit's poverty or emptiness. The mother and father are your attachment to beliefs and blood ties and desires and comforting habits. Don't listen to them. They seem to protect, but they imprison. They are your worst enemies. They make you afraid of living in emptiness. Someday you'll weep tears of delight in this court, remembering your mistaken parents. Know that your body nurtures the spirit, it helps it grow and gives it wrong advice. The body becomes eventually like a vest of chainmail in peaceful years, too hot in summer and too cold in winter. But the body's desires in another way are like an unpredictable associate whom you must be patient with, and the companion is helpful because because patience expands your capacity to love and feel peace. The patience of a rose close to a thorn keeps it fragrant. It's patience that gives milk to the male camel still nursing in its third year. And patience is what the prophets show to us. The beauty of careful sewing on the beauty of careful sewing on a shirt is the patience it contains. Friendship and loyalty have patience as the strength of their connection. Feeling lonely and ignoble indicates that you haven't been feeling lonely and ignoble indicates that you haven't been patient. Be with those who mix with God as honey blends with milk and say, anything that comes and goes, rises and sets, it is not what I love. Else you'll be like a caravan fire left to flare itself out alone beside the road.
That was an amazing reading, and I wasn't expecting a sort of story slash legend. Like when you started, I was more like, expecting some kind of, well, like what we read, more something more metaphorical and short, and I guess a little bit more spiritual. But this was pretty interesting. I loved it. Like it was different than what we've read before. Because
He has a lot of depth. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Rumi, there's more to Rumi than meets the eye. It's not all just love and happy flowery professions of love to someone. It's got some depth.
I totally agree
Say,
with you.
saying with Rumi, there's more than meets the eye. It seems like a like a meta pun. That's great. Um, okay, so we're coming towards the end of our 2 hour stream. We're going to be doing this once a week, starting an hour and 45 minutes ago, roughly. Not necessarily every week, not necessarily that time, but that's our schedule, and we're going to try and stick to it. For anybody who's here who wants to participate, next time, this is going to be a regular thing. We're editing this into about an hour program that's going to be released in podcast format. You're listening to and watching Not for Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for Living, with Cordell, Vexing Cat, and Jonathan Block. I'm your host. Thank you all for being here. We'll be coming to an end relatively soon. I'm so happy that you've all been here and listened. Right now, I'm going to read a short passage from the Phenomenology uh, article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's relating to Rumi's work. He's been our focus today. Rumi, the Sufi philosopher poet. We've read a bunch of his poems. We got into some contextualization of his life. Thank you so much for being here, guys. I'm going to go ahead and go into this, and then I think we're going to have a few more poems read by Cordell, Vexing Cat, and myself. I think I'm going to read one original poem, a very short one, and I think Vexing's going to read another relatively longer, Rumi poem. And Cordell, I don't know if you want to prepare like maybe an original, and then maybe something from another poet. I'm going to go ahead and read this article.
Sounds perfect.
Oh, a small amount of it. I mean, these articles are really long, and I just want to like kind of get my toes in there for you guys, so that anybody who's interested in enriching themselves with philosophy as you know a study, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is always available to people through the internet. It's a little dense, but it's a great place to go to really kind of realize how complicated any subject can be. You know, you can look it up in an Oxford dictionary, you could look it up otherwise, but to look it up here, it's very inundative informationally. There's just so much shit, but I really like it. So I'm going to go ahead and read some here. What is phenomenology? Phenomenology is commonly understood in either of two ways: as a disciplinary field in philosophy, or as a movement in the history of philosophy. The discipline of phenomenology may be defined initially as the study of structures of experience or consciousness. Literally, phenomenology is the study of phenomena, appearances of things, or things as they appear in our experience, or the way we experience things. Thus, the meanings things have in our experience. Phenomenology studies conscious experience as experienced from the subjective or first person point of view. This field of philosophy is then to be distinguished from and related to the other main fields of philosophy: ontology, the study of what being or what is; epistemology, the study of knowledge; logic, the study of valid reasoning; ethics, the study of right and wrong action, etc. The historical movement of phenomenology is the philosophical tradition launched in the first half of the 20th century by Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Jean-Paul Sartre, et al. In that movement, the discipline of phenomenology was prized as the proper foundation of all philosophy, as opposed, say, to ethics or metaphysics or epistemology. The methods and characterization of the discipline were widely debated by Husserl and his successors, and these debates continue to the present day. The definition of phenomenology offered above will thus be debatable, for example, by Heideggerians, but it remains the starting point in characterizing the discipline. In recent philosophy of mind, the term phenomenology is often restricted to the characterization of sensory qualities of seeing, hearing, etc., what it is like to have sensations of various kinds. However, our experience is normally much richer in content than mere sensation. Accordingly, in the phenomenological tradition, phenomenology is given a much wider range, addressing the meanings of things have in our experience, notably the significance of objects, events, tools, the flow of time, the self, and others, as these things arise and are experienced in our life world. To me, that last paragraph I just read really gets into the through line between phenomenology as a concept and the Sufi poet Rumi's content. He says here, however, our experience is normally much richer in content than mere sensation. I feel as though that sentence in itself would be something that Rumi would be like, duh. What do you think I've been trying to tell you guys? Like, I feel as though that kind of got to the point right there. Any thoughts from the floor?
Oh, that was pretty interesting. I like that. Thank you for the sharing.
I'm good. I really liked it. Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
To take it from a philosophical perspective, I would say it seems as though all these other things where they were talking about ontology, epistemology, logic, and ethics, that all of those things to be discussed must be perceived. Therefore, our perception filters and informs all of our understanding of those things, and therefore becomes what they were saying where yeah, in that movement, the discipline of phenomenology was prized as the proper foundation of all philosophy. Maybe conceptually, it would not be the foundation of said philosophy, but it would be the gateway, the doorway, the limit, the subjective prerequisite to even access those facets of philosophy. And even if you put them conceptually as the bottom rung, that your bottom rung in getting into it is intrinsically filtered through phenomenology or experience. So existence might be without experience, but not for you. So basically, for you to understand existence, the bottom line is experience. That's kind of the way I took that.
Yeah, it's the same here. That's what I understood.
In case I missed something or got something wrong, I'm waiting for any sort of input or corrections from Luna, our resident philosopher. Um, Yeah. So I think that's it for the really in the weeds, dense philosophy material. I think at this point, what I'm going to do is I might read just a little bit more from the Rumi Wikipedia. But first, let's get some readings in there. Cordell, did you have anything prepared to read?
Yeah, I have a couple of poems, an original and one from Charles Bukowski that I can easily read.
Bukowski. All
Yes. So the poem from Charles Bukowski is called Blue Bird. There is a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a blue bird in my heart. He wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke. And the horse and the bartender and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night, sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know that you're there, so don't be sad. Then I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die, and we sleep together like that with our secret pact. And it's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep. Do you? So that was the poem from Charles Bukowski.
I really appreciate how his work seems to always have a certain level of indignation and rage in it, but it's subdued and layered behind or taking a back seat to his interest in expressing interest or reality. Like he's pissed off, but he doesn't want to just be like, screw you, I'm pissed off. Even though it's in there, it's like he wants to actually do something with that rage, and be like, yeah, so I'm a little agitated, I'm a little angry, but maybe I can do something positive with that. I feel as though that's like in most, if not all, of his work when I experience it.
Yeah, it's the same here. I have this feeling that under the layers of alcohol, smoke, and even, slang and all that, he's got like a weird romantic side, like a weird
Yeah.
romantic foundation in which
Yeah, like
he.
there's this love in there of a love of life, and the anger comes from certain aspects of life thwarting that love. So it's like even though he is pissed, it's like the metaphysics of his work is not anger. It's like why? Why am I angry? What do I want to get done? What beauty do I want to see in this world?
Well, it's one of the things that really touches me in that poem is when you look at it and analyze a little bit the background. The reason why he actually mutes the bird is basically to make sales, to go to the grocery store, the bartender, and the horse, so they never see the little blue bird. And all of that is actually external forces out of his, you know, reach, basically. He can't change any of that thing. But he steers mute the bird, and in the end, when he does let him out, it's like when there is absolutely nobody. So it's honestly just for him that he lets the fucking bird out, which I find amazing personally. uh,
Like some sort of internal civil disobedience where he's like, to hell with it.
I think he's extremely self-destructive, but in a beautiful way. But then again, what poet or philosopher isn't in some way a little bit self-destructive?
Well, especially with Bukowski. I mean, I've heard so many people say, "Oh, he liked to drink," and I mean, I like to drink. A lot of people like to drink. I don't. I'm like, why do people keep saying that about him? And then I saw, him live reading his poetry in places, and he was just totally trashed. Like he was just like, you know, like he was dysfunctionally drunk and amused by it. And it's like, I was all, oh, I get it. He was like an unabashed drunk. He's just, oh, whatever. I'm gonna get trashed. You're better than me. Screw you. Or so, like this, his vibe is very degenerate, and I'm not sure. I I'm not sure how much like respect I have for that. Open appeal to degeneracy, but at the same time, there's a certain honesty and genuine authenticity to it that I very much respect.
The thing is, I'm not sure if he promoted alcoholism as much as he embraced it for himself. And in the sense of embracing it for himself, I would argue that in literature, I could actually mention a bunch of names of artists that got drunk the shit out of themselves and actually insulted every um, literacy society of their own time. Like Rimbaud, who's a French writer, who's nowadays one of the French jewels of literacy, literally went to the French Academy and took a piss on the judge table. So, you know, and yeah, and
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure to take a piss on that table, a person has to be drunk to do it. I mean, nobody does that on
Hmm.
water. Not, no offense, but
I don't know if I'd call him a poet, but someone like Hunter S. Thompson definitely was willing to lean into his degeneracy as opposed to be embarrassed by it.
well, it it's really a different. I mean, like I've seen it in modern form of arts sometimes, and the difference I can notice is that one is like a self-promotion, like I'm gonna go where nobody goes and get so drunk that nobody has gotten that drunk, and then write poetry about something that nobody has explored because nobody has been that drunk and explored that thematic at the same time. But that's one way of taking it, and the other way would be some artists that actually promote getting drunk or doing something wrong, and they're I feel like it touches more the discourse of I've seen the truth follow me, which I don't believe is the message that most poets want to do. Like I bet Bukowski was just talking his heart out and not saying everybody should smoke cigarettes and drink so much that the bluebird never comes out.
Mm-hmm. On that point, I'm going to go ahead and read an original poem of mine.
Sounds
This
great.
is a philosophical poem that I wrote after having been reading some Edgar Allan Poe, and Voltaire, and just the way their sonnets flow, like my mind started kind of working differently, and then this just sort of bubbled out of me. Stylistically, I think it's a bit incoherent, but whatever. I like the content, so I'll go ahead and read it. I found myself in a way such sitting, a manner that could be thought quite fitting, as though not understood in what way or for what purpose, that my feet lay upon the floor, upon this earth is. And to what can I attribute this earthly desire? Fueling my quest to move on, feeding this fire. How can one justify things not known to be just? What can come first, knowledge or trust? Upon molten stone standing on delicate crust, survival for surviving, all agree that we must. Doom assured upon abdication of this charge, the need to care for our form is infinitely large. Upon the horizon of what our kin has achieved, seeing the landfill rise as our desires relieved, we can learn a new way to live or just die. The choice is ours. There is literally no why. What future we choose is truly our own, belonging to no other than to our parents who've shown that without knowing the future we drive endlessly towards, we can shutter the windows, even with splintering boards. We can prepare for the storm of our own creation. We can rewrite our thoughts, making haste into patience. We can see the time that we have and the time we do not. We could just throw in the towel, then get high and do shots. But with a chance in hell, we can live all the way through this. The direction we go, the path that we choose is what defines what we are and defines all our purpose. Living the life given is what makes this earth what this earth is that we live in.
That was beautiful.
There you go. And we've come to the end of the 2 hour stream. I think we're going to continue for a little bit further and just get another couple of poems in here. What do you think? Should I read a tiny bit more about Rumi?
Yeah, and I don't know about Vex, but I'd like to read one more afterwards.
I've got two more by Rumi I was going to read, so
Lovely.
whenever.
Let's do this. Uh,
Sounds perfect to me.
Vexing, read one of those two. I'll read a little on Rumi, and then we can do one more by Vexing, and we'll have Cordell finish it off. And we'll be done.
Sounds great.
Roger, Roger.
A Community of the Spirit by Rumi. There is a community of the Spirit. Join it and feel the delight of walking in the noisy street and being the noise. Drink all your passion and be a disgrace. Close both eyes to see with the other eye. Open your hands, and if you want to be held, sit down in the circle. Quit acting like a wolf and feel the shepherd's love filling you. At night, your beloved wanders. Don't accept consolations. Close your mouth against food, taste the lover's mouth in yours. You moan, she left me, he left me. 20 more will come. Be empty of worrying. Think of who created thought. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. Live in silence. Flow down and down in always widening rings of being.
Right. Okay. So this is from the Wikipedia on Rumi, the subject poet for today. For anybody who hasn't been here throughout this entire presentation, we covering Rumi because this entire stream/podcast is intended to focus on poetry and philosophy. So we thought we'd start off with some philosopher poets, and Rumi's one of the most famous ones. The more I read of his stuff, the more I like him. And so this is from the Wikipedia on Rumi. It's the section called Teachings. Like other mystic and Sufi poets of Persian literature, Rumi's poetry speaks of love which infuses the world. Rumi's teachings also express the tenets summarized in Quranic verse, Quranic verse, which Shams-e Tab Tabrizi. I'm sorry, you guys, to anybody who understands these languages. I'm sure my pronunciation is horrific. Rumi's teachings also express the tenets summarized in the Quranic verse, which Shams-e Tabrizi cited as essence of prophetic guidance. Know that there is no God but He, and ask forgiveness for your sin. In the interpretation attributed to Shams, the first part of the verse commands the humanity to seek knowledge of Tawhid, oneness of God, while the second instructs them to negate their own existence. In Rumi's terms, Tawhid is lived most fully through love, with the connection being made explicit in his verse that describes love as that flame which, when it blazes up, burns away everything except the everlasting beloved. Rumi's longing and desire to attain his ideal is evident in the following poem from his book, The Masnavi. It shows this in a Sanskrit language I couldn't possibly understand. You guys can check out the Wikipedia entry on Rumi if you want to see it, but it's obviously translated, which I will read. I died to the mineral state and became a plant. I died to the vegetable state and reached animality. I died to the animal state and became a man. Then what should I fear? I have never become less from dying. At the next charge forward, I will die to human nature, so that I may lift up my head and wings and soar among the angels. And I must also jump from the river, the state of the angel. Everything perishes except his face. Once again, I will become sacrificed from the state of the angel. I will become that which cannot come into the imagination. Then I will become non existent. Non existence says to me in tones like an organ, truly, to him is our return. The Masnavi weaves fables, scenes from everyday life, Quranic revelations, and exegesis, and metaphysics into a vast and intricate tapestry. Rumi believed passionately in the use of music, poetry, and dance as a path for reaching God. For Rumi, music helped devotees to focus their whole being on the divine and to do this so intensely that the soul was both destroyed and resurrected. It was from these ideals the practice of whirling dervishes developed into a ritual form. His teachings became the base for the order of the Mevlevi, which his son Sultan Walid organized. Rumi encouraged Sama, listening to music and turning or doing the sacred dance. In the Mevlevi tradition, Sama represents a mystical journey of spiritual ascent through the mind and love to the perfect one. In this journey, the seeker symbolically turns towards the truth, grows through love, abandons the ego, finds the truth, and arrives at the perfect. By the way, perfect one, he, perfect, they're capitalized. So they're obviously alluding to a specific proper noun deity or whatever, and a specific thing. Finds the truth and arrives at the perfect. The seeker then returns from this spiritual journey with greater maturity to love and to be of service to the whole creation without discrimination with regards to belief, races, classes, and nations. In other verses of the Masnavi, Rumi describes in detail the universal message of love. The lover's cause is separate from all other causes. Love is the astrolabe of God's mysteries. Rumi's favorite musical instrument was the ney, a reed flute. The end of that one paragraph before that last brief poem, that reminded me, if any of you have ever heard of a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I don't know if it's just similar practices they picked this up from, or if that author was a fan of Rumi's stuff, but it just reminds me of that, talking about moving on to another world, learning lessons, and then coming back to be basically this badass egalitarian who's just there to help and lead people. I just, I it really made me think of that, and I think it's great, even though I'm a total, you know, non-religious type person. I find a lot of this stuff to be very uh, engrossing, engaging, and intriguing. It's even though I don't take the same aspects of reality the way he or other people do, it still resonates with me and my own existential journey. Even though I don't define it as a spiritual journey personally, I feel as though sometimes these might be a matter of semantics rather than of, actually a difference in the nature of existence that we're all trying to describe. Another thought that comes from what I read there was that his works centered on love, and he went another way with it than someone like Albert Camus, the famous French philosopher, the famous existentialist French philosopher who said he wasn't an existentialist or a philosopher. That guy talked about love a lot. And he ended up coming to certain conclusions that I came to before I even ran into his work, where he's basically saying that we have these meaningful questions and there's no answers to them. Therefore, life is absurd, and sort of invented absurdism. And I feel as though there's a very strong similarity between Rumi and Camus in the idea of love being what ties everything together, and a wide divide between them in that Camus seemed to think that answering certain questions like this were just flat impossible and unavailable. And through existentialism, you could, like, make up your own purpose. You could face the absurdity and express yourself well. And that was the answer to get away from nihilism. But that Rumi seemed to suggest that these questions are maybe not answerable through language, maybe not just all, oh, here I have an answer to your deepest questions, but more like there is an answer, and that you will sort of, maybe inevitably, I don't know if he believed that, but I get this sense that he felt as though we were on a journey of enlightenment, and these questions are simply the questions being here and now and unanswerable is merely a step in this journey towards answering them ultimately. It's kind of the sense I get from it.
Well, on the semantic side, I think I totally agree with you. I'll go even a step forward and I'll say that because the world is holistic and everything is connected, and everyone influences everyone, um, basically it is very plausible that you came around those thoughts by yourself and because of other chains of thoughts before yours, before you actually came, well, before you actually saw the original works, which would make total sense because, you know, everything is holistic, everything is connected. I probably know things about people I don't know in a non-conscious way in the back of my mind just because somebody mentioned something about it sometime.
Right. Like, it sounds like you're not so much like unconscious or subconscious, even though it would be related in psychology terms. It sounds like what you're talking about is sort of ineffable feelings combined with intuition to, like, produce answers to these things that we yearn for.
Oh yeah, it's precisely that. It's a mix of basically external forces and our own conclusions on what we hear around us. You know, like mm, personally, I'm a big believer of ideas. You know, like beautiful ideas deserve to live on and keep on going. Like for example, um, okay, uh, the whole thing about women's right that's put back on the table in many countries, uh, the idea of keeping those ideas intact, of defending those ideas and making sure that women have equal right to men and access to abortion and all those, things that we question again. Uh, Personally, I think it's worth defending. And like in Belgium, this is actually a pretty good news I'd like to share. In Belgium, a new law passed to ban, um, how do you call that? Discrimination against mothers who do breastfeeding in public place, which I love. Honestly, finally we got to that point in which a law was made to make sure there would be no discrimination against mothers. And I feel actually really proud of that. So some
Mhm.
ideas are worth defending.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I want to make one quick point today about or I want to make one quick point now about what we've been going over, in the sense that I feel as though two things. One, I think it's painfully obvious that Rumi was what I would call a mind-body dualist, and that the things that we think of in the realm of the mind simply isn't of this world, or this physical world that we're in. I don't know if that would be a fair assessment, but that's what I get from it through like my translation of different philosophical perspectives. And second, I ran across the word aesthetics while I was going through the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy articles. I know Luna is very fascinated with aesthetics, and I certainly am. I would say all four of us, you know, care about aesthetics, both personally through our own just experience and comfort, like our interests just intrinsically, and also philosophically. And I just want to say at this point, from having gotten into Rumi's work as much as I have this intuitive feeling that my gut tells me that he cared less about aesthetics than the meaning behind the work. And that while it's not like he was trying to make ugly things or just absolutely didn't care, what I mean is it doesn't feel like the core center of what it is. Like music being beautiful is merely a tool to get towards higher understanding, and the aesthetics themselves are more of a means than an end. Maybe any of you guys want to comment on either of those observations, but I picked that up thinking about it throughout today, and I just wanted to, you know, say it out loud. What do you guys think about that?
Well, on my side, I think it really depends on how we define beauty, and not in the sense that the common question, what is beauty, but more. Okay, for example, when I write, I use techniques of that I know are historically beautiful because for centuries they've been accepted as agreeable to the ears. And I suspect for music it's the same thing. It all goes back into other techniques that are connected to techniques from the past, and so on and so on and so on. So if mastering those techniques is beauty, then that's one thing. But if the message is also beauty, then suddenly beauty is two different things that are mixed in one. And I'm not sure if we can actually separate those two things. And that's without considering all the other forces, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure there is more than technique and message in a poem. But yeah, that's my take.
All
It's
right.
interesting to me, the discussion of aesthetics, because when I think aesthetics, I'm a very visual person. So like the visual appeal of things. So like the way a poem, for instance, is written across the page, like the way it's formed, sometimes in shapes and sometimes in very long linear lines. The visual aspect of it is very easy for me to understand. And then through the exploration of poetry, the sound of a word, like the whole feel of the word and the way they're strung together like pearls on a string, they add to the feeling of like that aesthetic, the auditory aesthetic. Um, so I think for me, aestheticism will always be a huge part of my life because even if I lose my eyes and then all I can do is hear, something beautiful, or vice versa. If I lose my hearing and I can only see what is beautiful, I'll still be able to absorb that. And through beauty and through aesthetics, we have hope. So it's just, something to bring joy. And to me, aesthetics is very much the bringing of joy into your life through, various means.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the comparison there when you say the word aesthetics to you, it has a tendency to connotate visual because that's like what you're into and what like what you, okay, for you, you're more image centric than maybe the people around you, or maybe then like in your own sphere, it's like you think the word aesthetics, you immediately think of images. But like I was raised as a musician, I know a lot about music theory. Yes, when I think of aesthetics, I do think of visual stuff, but I have a tendency to think immediately of like harmonies, like beautiful sounds. And
Mhm.
not that I dislike rhythm in music, but to me the notes themselves are more important than, like the actual percussive elements. And that said, you also have the percussive elements, and that's musical too. So like even within music, I more narrowly aesthetics get down to the specifics of like chords and harmonies and just the quality of sound where I'm like, now that's what I'm talking about. And like those aesthetics to me are so important. I think it's fascinating how there's sort of a through line. Um, I guess to say, it's not for nothing in a sense that we all have our own different ways of perceiving reality, and that through line of aesthetics could be this not the same, but there could be a sameness between one's appreciation for visual aesthetics, different subcategories of those visual aesthetics, maybe even tactile aesthetics like a massage or something, a poem having certain rhythm and even like conceptual aesthetics of like what you're describing and how you would visualize that, and then the rhythms within the poetry, and then just qualities of sound, and maybe even aesthetics of movement with dance,
Mhm.
and that there's a certain thing inside of us that makes us appreciate that and desire that and want that, and almost like this aesthetic altruism that when people think of and are aware of beautiful things, it seems as though they want to spread that somehow. And I think that's really neat.
Our content guru just said something, and I'm going to read out what she wrote. Basically, aesthetics is the means that continually creates something new, something that adds to our understanding those unspeakable realities between us as fleshy beings, with specific inputs and outputs in the infinitely complex and interpretable world around us. So, yes, John, the pull to divinity is seen in aesthetics.
Right. Right. Oh, like maybe what Plato's unwritten doctrine, he was talking about oneness when you're saying like divinity, where it's like we're all one, everything is one. And perhaps through aesthetics, we see some sort of like nexus between all these things where we're all connected in sort of a positive and resonating way.
Mm.
Uh,
Well,
But yeah, one other thing I want to mention, sort of, I guess, to the audience. So basically, in this week's content focusing on Rumi, it's a bit impossible to really focus on certain aspects of poetry because it's written in other languages that I don't really understand or have like the time or patience to go through. We could be listening to readings of Rumi in their original language and analyze other aspects of the poetry. But in future, when we get into, you know, uh, English poems written in English, I think something that we can do would be to do a little bit of analysis on the actual poetry itself as a performative thing, the feet, the meter, the rhythm, the phrasing, all that kind of stuff. I think that would be a neat thing to get into a little bit. As long as we're talking about aesthetics, I think it's fair to say that it's impossible for me to even evaluate certain aesthetical qualities of this work because it's culturally alien to me in certain ways. It's it's another from another place and even time where the same thing with ancient Greeks. They did a lot of philosophy in poetic form, and I mean, I've learned some stuff about it, and it's impossible for me to understand. It's like in their language, they have what's said, the text, and then the subtext, where there's connotation and secondary meanings to basically every word and phrase. So different people translate it in different ways. And since it's poetry, I find it a fascinating concept that there's a certain aesthetic quality to that philosophical work that's not entirely inaccessible to me, but certainly in a 2-hour program where we're just sitting here shooting the shit about it, it's going to be impossible to get into certain stuff like that. So I think it's just neat to mention that going forward, say we do some Voltaire, we can really get into the craft of poetry as an art aside from all this philosophical garf narf. I think that's a neat thing to look forward to.
That's a beautiful message, Brox. I wanted to say though, to Vex, you mentioned giving hope into aesthetics, and like on first thought, I would totally agree. But then, I was thinking about long poems like Faust from Marlowe or stuff like that. Like they are really dark and yet, well, also full of despair, anger, jealousy, and stuff like that. And yet there is beauty in them. Like even Hamlet, for example, like the ending is so tragic and everybody betrays each other, and yet there is beauty in it.
I want to take a quick moment to go through some of these comments. I've been so distracted with we have like a behind the scenes chat here for content we're sharing, and then I'm reading. So I just brought up this chat here, and I realized I apologize to any of the audience members who are contributing here and being quasi ignored. I realize that you all can see it, so it's there. But I just wanted to touch really quick. Peaches and Cream mentioned that she's gaining a whole new appreciation for phenomenology. Thank you for that. That's really cool, and she was talking about discussions of the nature of applying meaning to our conception experiences in a book by Antonio Damasio. Just wanted to say that one out loud. And then I think this is on the subject of aesthetics here. Technique, beauty, knowledge, concepts, and experience which can be described, but the description is not the experience. Aesthetic exists in all form of expression. And then here we have bamboo hats mentioned. Aesthetic for me is useful. I think it's maximization. If something is aesthetically pleasing, it's at the upper echelon of whatever that may be. Aesthetic food, for instance, doesn't just look pleasing; it tastes fantastic too. And then back to Peaches and Cream mentioned. Vexing Cat said, bringing joy. If joy is flourishing, then it is seen aesthetically in nature, and beauty is the way we express our experience of this. And then to Cordell from Peaches and Cream, there is a beauty in death and pain, especially in contrast to love and hope. And I just wanted to express.
Nobody can hear me.
Oh,
Oh, sorry,
I
guys.
think your internet just took a
N-
dump.
no, I was muted. I muted myself. No, so I was
Okay.
saying that I got confused now. So I was saying that uh, there are texts in which beauty can be seen in other ways, like, well, sometimes. Okay, I'm confused now. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, you're okay. Just so uh, I was just reading some stuff here about the joy is flourishing. This is seen aesthetically in nature, and beauty is the way we express our experience of this, and that there is a beauty in death and pain, especially in contrast to love and hope. And then she said this is also seen in nature. Did that did that kickstart your thought process there?
Yeah. So basically, what I meant to say is that beauty can be perceived in things that can be horrible, and some example of it are books of Faustus by Marlowe, that talk or even Hamlet that talk about by Shakespeare that talk about betrayals and horrible subjects, very destructive, and yet make it beautiful. And I wanted to also conclude with the idea that I think that sometimes working on the ugly and making it beautiful is also, in a certain way, trying to reach hope and beauty. Well, and trying to be hopeful and, taking away part of the ugliness and the tense part of hardship that would be in a story like Hamlet, for example. Because on and on, if I was to speak about Hamlet's story in a vulgar way, like without it being literary relevant, it will actually sound terrible. But making it beautiful allows us to read something that has such a horrible message, and at the same time, it's also an attempt to make something ugly beautiful, which is somehow hopeful, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, that's pretty much the idea.
Like a transmutation, like to the point of like catharsis, to address the darkness in our lives without being afraid of it, but to make it palatable or even positive, while not denying its ugliness and pain.
Exactly. That's exactly my chain of thought.
And I would also say this outside of the specifics you mentioned, like in general, like if someone was to say that um, the Greek tragedies are not beautiful because they have negative subject matter would just be so absurd on its face. It would almost seem to be not worth discussion. People would be like, "What?" You're like, "That's not beautiful art. They're talking about bad things," and you're like, "Yeah, dude, you can go now." Like, I don't think it's sort of obvious in certain contexts that to take dark and negative material and use that as fuel for something beautiful is a mainstay of, yeah, just the term tragedy. Greek tragedy is like a whole genre of art that's based on dark and ugly things, but you know it's it doesn't produce a dark and ugly play or whatever. I mean, maybe certain aspects of it, but yeah.
The part that Vex was totally right about was that it gives hopes. Like, I believe that certain people who read books like Hamlet or Faust and actually manage to relate to stories like that, which I think is pretty hard to actually relate to that because, the, the type of story it is. Um, I'm sure they can actually find hope where everybody sees, a terrible story, and that's the beauty of it. It's that not every work is supposed to give hope to everybody, but actually some stories are supposed to give hope to the totally hopeless people that are lost in the middle of this world.
Right. Let's see. At this point, I think I'd like to do another reading. Didn't we have some prepared material? I think Vexing had one left that she was ready to read. And I think you, Cordell,
Mhm.
said you had at least one other poem that you were interested in reading before we put a tin hat on this thing.
Okay. So this one is called Ode 314 by Rumi. Those who don't feel this love pulling them like a river, those who don't drink dawn like a cup of spring water, or take in sunset like supper, those who don't want to change, let them sleep. This love is beyond the study of theology. That old trickery and hypocrisy. You want to improve your mind that way. Sleep on. I've given up on my brain. I've torn the cloth to shreds and thrown it away. If you're not completely naked, wrap your beautiful robe of words around you and sleep.
I've heard that one before. It's funny, I haven't been into Rumi long enough to really run into his poems like that repeatedly, but some of the ones that I like more are just more obvious. I hear it and um it's kind of nice to hear his work again. I'm pretty recent to being a like a poetry fan, so to speak. As a musician, I've always sort of I was telling you earlier with aesthetics, I like the quality of notes and stuff, and words mean less to me. And poetry through music has always been sort of a bane for me. I'm like, oh God, people quote poetry and call it music. But now through understanding more and more about the human condition, I'm realizing that it's all more than valid and that stories are some of the most important things in our lives, and just the words themselves are stories, like everything's a meme, each letter, each word, and it's like they have all this meaning behind it. And yeah, it's really fun to get into poetry at all over the last like 6 months of my life, and the last few months becoming aware of Rumi. It's neat to hear a poem again that I really resonated with me the first time it comes up, and it's almost like it's fresh nostalgia, but it still is like this feeling of nostalgia. I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I'm really enjoying this journey of getting into poetry, and I really thank you guys for hanging out with me and doing this. And Cordell, thank you for inspiring me to work with you on this project. I'm really excited about all this, guys.
Well, I wanted to say it was a beautiful reading too. I love that vexing, and yeah, honestly, this poetry session is amazing. We should keep on doing it. Like, I cannot express how much I enjoy this.
Well, for what it's worth, my intent is that we're going to do this for 1 year. Not that we can't do it for more, and not that we can't do it for less, but I'm hoping that we can start this week and do it once a week all year long and release, 53 episodes, and we'll do it on a regular time and date. I don't know when the podcast release will be. We'll get back together with you on that one. And yeah, it was a great reading, Vex. I guess for me, it almost goes without saying that's why I really wanted you to be here. You have such a lovely voice and you're just so good at reading. Yeah, thank you for being here. Luna, thank you for being here behind the scenes. Yeah, again, Cordell, thank you for inspiring me to participate in this. We have our resident philosopher and curator of material, Luna, behind the scenes. We have Vexing Cat here, our uh, just lovely poetry reader who just brings a lot to the table with her quality of voice and ability to read with such emotion. We have our resident poet and primary reader Cordell, and I'm your host Jonathan Block. Thank you every single person for being here. I think we're going to close out with one more poem from Cordell.
Okay, so
This has been Not for Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for Living. Thanks again for being here. Cordell, you have the floor.
thank you. So my next poem is a reference to birthdays. It's called Hellish Birthday, and I wrote it about 3 years ago. Time unravels as a burning candle. As my eyes are shut, the moment passes, reminding me of full hourglasses. When grains of sand were easy to handle, in the darkness, it lights the path ahead, taking me further than I could have been led. I open my eyes and it's halfway through. A song broke the silence as my breath blew. The older I get, the more candles burn. For each of them, I look into the past, to days in which everything was to yearn. The world was a playground and very vast. With each grain of sand comes a memory, and soon I myself am the piling sand, and the memory becomes reverie. Light as the lifeline from my palm's hand soon vanishes, and the songs slowly cease, leaving me a strange sensation of peace. Thank you, Pitch and Scream. So that was my poem for tonight.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We're going to go ahead and play our theme song one more time and just close her out. We'll see you next week. That's at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. I could say it in a whole bunch of other times, but I'm not going to really bother. If you don't know your relationship to Greenwich Mean Time, just look it up. Yeah, Cordell's +1. I'm a -8. Vexing's -9. We're all over the planet. It's a global presentation. Thank you so much for being here. Cordell, go ahead and cue the music.
Have a good night, everybody, and thanks for your presence. It was amazing having this reading and so many people around us.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'm playing the music.
All right, guys. Good work. I'm done. So let's go write some
You